Mirëmëngjesi zonja dhe zotëri. Kam kënaqësi që sot në emër të Institutit Kërkimor për Çështje Evropiane dhe të Zhvillimit të bëj hapjen e kësaj konferencë shtypi ku do të bëhet prezantimi i sondazhit Zeri i popullit rreth finales së Madhe ndërmjet Kosovës dhe Serbisë Vell.3. Ky sondazh është vazhdimsi e dy sondazheve të mëhershme që janë mbajtur në dhjetor 2018 dhe qershor 2019 rreth të njëjtës temë. Sondazhi është dashur të prezantohet në muajin mars 2020, por për shkak të rrethonave rreth pandemisë globale COVID-19 ka qenë e pamundur që të bëhet më herët një gjë e tillë. Fillimisht profesori nga Universiteti i Oxfordit, një herët ekspert i Institutit Ridea, do të bëj prezantimin e gjetjeve të sondazhit dhe më pastaj do të jemi të hapur për pyetjet tuaja eventuale. Sondazhi në tërësi dhe publikimi i këtij raporti është mbështetur nga ambasada norvegjeze në Kosovë. Faleminderit.
Good morning. This morning I'm going to present the third report of the research carried out by Ridea on public opinion, the Vox Populi, about the grand finale between Kosovo and Serbia. The aims of the research are to understand public opinion in Kosovo about the dialogue between Serbia and Kosovo, and to understand the perceptions and attitudes of the citizens about the possible grand finale. We also want to understand how these opinions are changing over time. There are three main issues we're going to be looking at: whether or not the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia should be restarted. The second is the perception of Kosovo citizens towards three possible scenarios for an eventual deal between the two countries. And thirdly, the changes over time and the differences between the two communities within Kosovo. Turning to the methodology, the survey is based on a nationally representative sample of just over 1,000 respondents across the whole of Kosovo. With a survey of this size, there'll be a margin of error of 3 percentage points, but when we're looking at the whole population, but the margin of error is rather larger when we're looking at subgroups such as the Serbian population in Kosovo. Survey was conducted across all 38 municipalities in Kosovo, using proportional sampling to make sure that each area is equally appropriately represented. We used random route sampling procedures to select respondents, and the data were then analysed with SPSS, that is the statistical package for the social sciences. And the primary aim of the research is to faithfully reflect citizens' own perceptions and attitudes. In the next slide, we show the distribution of the sample across the different regions, which you can see are the numbers correspond to the population sizes in each main region, and the sample faithfully corresponds to the size of the two communities. 90% of our respondents were Albanian, 8% Serb, and 2% from other ethnic groups in Kosovo. The average age was 40, but there was an overrepresentation of men, 65%, as opposed to 35% women, and we've corrected for this in the analysis. So for the first set of results, we asked the question, would you support restarting the dialogue between the governments of Kosovo and Serbia? And here the analysis shows that both the Albanian and Serbian respondents support restarting. 70% of Albanians and 66% of Serbs either somewhat or very much support restarting the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia. However, you can see from the figures that the Serbian respondents were somewhat less enthusiastic in their support and were less likely to say that they very much supported the dialogue restarting, and slightly more likely to go for the intermediate category. We followed this up with the question, do you support that the governments of Kosovo and Serbia should make every possible effort to reach a final agreement? Here we find, again, similar picture. The great majority, both communities, responded that the governments of Kosovo and Serbia definitely should, or probably should, make every possible effort to reach a final agreement. 92% among Albanians and 64% among Serbs supported making every possible effort to reach a final agreement. We also found that there was people who had answered to the first question about restarting the dialogue also were very much in support of making every possible effort to reach a final agreement. We turn next to the three main scenarios. Scenario 1 is continuation of the status quo. Scenario 2 was de facto recognition from Serbia in return for extended executive powers for the Kosovo Serb Association, the KSA. And scenario 3 was border adjustment with land moving between Serbia and Kosovo, providing that that resulted in global recognition of Kosovo and opened the path for UN membership. Those are the three scenarios. Looking first at scenario 1, the continuation of the status quo, which would entail continuing lack of mutual recognition and political and diplomatic relations between Kosovo and Serbia. And here we found that very few, only 6% of the Albanian respondents were satisfied with the continuation of the status quo. 90% among the Albanian respondents were either very little or not at all satisfied with the continuation of the status quo. Among the Serbian respondents, there was higher level of satisfaction, up to 46%, while among the Serbians, 43% were dissatisfied. So a much more even balance of opinion within the Serbian community, whereas among the Albanian community, overwhelming dissatisfaction with the status quo. Moving on to scenario 2, de facto recognition from Serbia, providing that the Kosovo Serb Association was granted extended executive powers. And here we find substantial disagreement between the two communities. 87% of the Albanian respondents, but only 26% of the Serbian respondents either strongly or somehow disagreed with granting executive powers for the Kosovo-Serb Association. So that there was much more support among the Serb community for this scenario, little support indeed among the Albanian community. So neither of the first two scenarios achieve much support. There was somewhat greater support for scenario 3, although still falling well short of a majority. Scenario 3 was border adjustment between Kosovo and Serbia, which would result in the global recognition of Kosovo and would open the path for UN membership. And here we found that 29% of Albanian respondents and 40% among Serbian respondents thought that their Kosovo should either definitely or probably support border adjustment. In contrast, the majority of the Albanian respondents, 67% and 39% among the Serbian respondents, thought that Kosovo definitely or probably should not support border adjustment. So there isn't majority support for any of the three scenarios, although border adjustment has the strongest support among the Albanian respondents. Because this is the third of three surveys which have been carried out with identical question wording, we can compare the trends over time. So looking first at the trends with respect to scenario 1, continuation of the status quo, we can see that there has, if anything, been a slight increase in dissatisfaction, that people are not satisfied. There's not a great deal of change throughout our three surveys. The great majority of the population have expressed dissatisfaction with the status quo. But there is a slight increase from 67% to 78% in the second survey, and it stayed at around that level in the third survey. So continuing high level of discontent with the status quo. Then turning to the second scenario, again, opposition to granting extended executive powers to the KSA has been substantial, little change overall, although in further, more detailed analysis, which is not shown here, we found some considerable evidence of polarization, growing polarization over time between the two communities. So although the overall shows little change, there is greater division with increasing support among the Serb population for the extended executive powers. And then in the case of the third scenario, border adjustment between Kosovo and Serbia, again, the pattern is fairly stable over time. There's been some switching between the proportions saying definitely should not be border adjustment and those who said probably should not. So there are some movements over time with a slight shift towards opposition, but broadly speaking, if we look at the overall picture, again, it's a picture of stability over time. So in summary, what we find is that the great majority support of both populations support restarting the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia. There's also strong support for the government to make every effort to reach a final agreement. And there's very little support for the continuation of the current status quo between Kosovo and Serbia. There's also little overall support for granting extended executive powers to the KSA, although there are growing differences over time between the two communities. There's somewhat more support overall for border adjustment, gets up to 30%, providing that there's global recognition of Kosovo, but little change over time in that respect. So opinions on the three scenarios have changed little, but there are worrying signs of increasing polarization between the Albanian and Serbian populations, particularly over the extended executive powers for the KSA. So in conclusion, firstly, there's a very striking contrast between strong support for reaching an agreement, but the absence of any majority support for any of the three specific scenarios. So people are strongly in favor of reaching an agreement, but they don't have a clear view about the way forward, about the precise content of the eventual agreement. This contrast is particularly marked among the Albanian community, who are highly dissatisfied with the status quo, but who also see major downsides about the three alternative scenarios that have been put forward. Thirdly, the Albanian and the Serb populations of Kosovo speak with increasingly different voices with respect to executive powers for the KSA, but the two communities speak with one voice on the need to continue the dialogue and to make every effort to reach a final agreement. So public opinion, the voice of the people, says loudly and clearly, end the stalemate, secure international recognition and European integration. While there is no precise understanding among public opinion as to what the agreement should look like, the evidence suggests that an agreement which achieved these major goals would secure public assent. Thank you.